Hello, I'm Ndimyake, Mwakalyelye. This is Africa 54, where we begin tonight with South Sudan, where many believe a power struggle is taking place between President Salva Kiir and his political rivals. Tensions came to a head Wednesday when Kiir fired his Vice President Riek Machar and dismissed his entire cabinet. The upheaval comes amid crucial oil and security talks with Sudan. Johnny Carson, who was the U.S. top envoy for Africa, says President Kiir must keep his country together.
No one wants to see a return to anything that resembles widespread conflict in the South. There is already a large amount of conflict in Jonglei State. We could see potentially conflict emerging amongst various groups in the South between the Dinka and the Nuer. That would be deeply unfortunate. And within those communities separately as well, there are potential lines of fissure.
Now, for more insight on South Sudan, we're joined by Grant Harris, Special Assistant to President Barack Obama and Senior Director for African Affairs at the White House. Mr. Harris, thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you for having me.
So obviously the U.S. is looking with a lot of concern at what is happening in South Sudan. Now there are some internal players who are saying this is just democracy at work. President Kiir has the mandate to shuffle his cabinet if he wants, but the U.S. is saying that this is a source of concern, that it might actually lead to instability in the country. Why?
The concern that we have is the prospect of instability, but the concern is also the need for a government that is advancing the development and the peace and security issues that the country desperately needs. So what we're asking for right now is that President Kiir quickly and transparently reconstitute the government. The idea being in the context of the interim constitution and in a way that reflects the diversity of the people of South Sudan, form a government and then work out on those issues that are really the challenges of the day. And that includes the peace and security issues. It also includes specifically the conflict in Jonglei State.
Absolutely. Well, before we get to the Jonglei State aspect, the shuffle within this cabinet, you're talking about really top players who participated in the country's struggle to independence, top officials within the SPLM as well as the SPLA, when you're talking about the Vice President Riek Machar and also the Secretary General, Pagan Amum. Are you concerned about what this could mean in terms of their being able to join forces against Mr. Kiir, maybe really destabilize the country, go back to war?
I think stability is the key issue. We're very focused on preventing any kind of instability, and I think the reason to do things quickly and transparently is precisely to avoid any prospect like that. We don't want to have a fracturing of the political center in Juba, and we want to have a government that's able to tackle the challenges that it really desperately needs to do.
What about examining some of the issues that led to this particular development? You know, there's been a lot of, I guess, upheaval within the party, a lot of very open public criticism against President Kiir and how he's running the party and the government. What is the U.S.'s position on that? And is it taking into consideration those positions from the, I guess, now ousted members?
Our position is really quite clear. It's natural in a democracy to have differences of views. It's natural to have a struggle for who leads a political party. But the right way to do it is in a transparent manner so that voices can be heard. What we don't want is to have people feeling that they weren't a part of the process or that they were that measures were taken not in accordance with the Constitution. And so the way to go about it, especially in such a diverse society that has fought for so much and that has such high expectations of its government, is to have a very candid conversation, to have open competition, but informing the government to do so quickly and in a way that's really going to reflect those voices and have the strength to make progress and meet these expectations.
Let's talk about what is being really looked at as key factors that could propel the country forward. And this is, of course, the issues surrounding security, issues surrounding the oil deal. And that seems to be pretty fragile right now based on some of the conflicts that are going on. There's counter-accusations between Sudan and South Sudan about rebels being backed by which forces. The AU, of course, and IGAD are involved in trying to mediate this. What is the U.S.'s role in trying to maintain some level of understanding between the two forces so that come August 7th, which is the date set by Sudan, oil production will not come to a stop?
As you mentioned the role of the AU, which has been critical. President Ndimyake in particular and the high-level implementation panel have been very focused on this, including to the measure of shuttle diplomacy between capitals. And our key point in our view, which is not unique to the United States, but I think really is a widely held view, and that's the parties have reached agreement. From the September agreements of last year, there's a way forward, there is a process. There needs to be a political process. There's a real danger in using oil as the leverage for either side, and that means it's going to undercut the economic growth that both countries desperately need. And so there is a political process to address the concerns, and they should be addressed there. That's been our key message throughout, and we hope that the parties are going to implement fully and credibly the agreements that they've reached. You also mentioned the proxy support as well. There too, there is a political process which includes things that will provide for observation, monitoring. There is a way forward. But as we've been saying to both parties for a long time, there's no role for interfering in a neighboring country, and proxy support simply needs to end.
The humanitarian impact of the dispute, Jonglei State, hundreds of thousands, I believe the estimate right now is 100,000 refugees created as a result of this. Right. UNHCR very overburdened. What do you see or foresee happening in terms of trying to alleviate that potential problem?
This is indeed a crisis, and it's one of the reasons as well that we think you need a government so quickly, because the challenge is now. There's a peace and security issue, as you said, but there's also a humanitarian crisis, where, as you mentioned, over 100,000 citizens, mainly ethnic Murle, have been displaced by this fighting. And we've heard some really disturbing reports about what's happening in Jonglei State that are tinged with ethnic violence, that are tinged as well with reports that elements of the Sudan People's Liberation Army have been complicit in human rights abuses, which is deeply concerning and I think needs to be looked into right away. And all the more reason that the government needs to be looking at this, reaching out, encouraging political reconciliation, also making sure that the humanitarian access exists, because this 100,000 people are there with no food, with no water, with no access to critical services, and in many ways, the international community is unable even to provide assistance to them right now.
2 years into South Sudan's independence, there have been a lot of course, assessments, a lot of perspectives, some saying that it's been a disappointment, clearly, that what was expected, even among South Sudanese, you talk to them, they say that what they expected in terms of upward moving progress seems to be stalled by things that really should have been rectified and addressed before even the elections, at the completion of the comprehensive peace agreement. Your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that the expectations are indeed high, and South Sudanese citizens rightfully expect a government that's going to advance democracy and development. That's what so many fought for, that's what so many have sacrificed for. So we understand that there are a lot of challenges, but there is a vision that was put forward when South Sudan became independent, and that was one of good governance and one of transparency. And we think that if leadership, true leadership, comes forward and really makes the right choices, that there is a path, and there is a path towards greater development. We're seeing more broadly in the region across Africa explosive economic growth in many parts of Africa. We're seeing great advances in development. We don't want a situation in South Sudan, and in Sudan as well, where these peace and security challenges or where a lack of good governance hamper and deny the needs and the aspirations of the population.
And I believe that's all we have time for.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, we appreciate it. Thank you so much, Mr. Grant Harris. Of course, Mr. Grant Harris is the Senior Director for African Affairs at the White House, and he joined us here today on Africa 54.